The next talk for the day would be given by Kishore Jalleda. He is presently working as the head product engineer in Yahoo. He's worked with Eric Ries, the author of Lean Startup, and was among the pioneers of continuous development. A huge round of applause, please.
But yeah, the reason I'm here is to talk about our journey. This is sort of my story, and also story of some of the people I've worked with at Yahoo. Roughly in terms of the agenda, we'll talk about my vision, the challenges faced, and then we also talk. There's going to be some closing thoughts, and also just so you guys know. This talk is not about perfection, it's about progress. So we'll be talking about the progress we've made in terms of our journey into DevOps. Hopefully, considering the fact that I've come so far, all the way from San Francisco, hopefully it's going to be worth your time. In terms of my vision, just making sure things are, I worked at Imbue as I was introduced for 6 years, and Imbue, as you all know, is one of the pioneers of CD. Eric Ries is our was our CTO. He's the author of the book Lean Startup. Fundamentally, what it really means is, don't build something that no one wants, right? It's about rapid experimentation, MVP, which is minimum viable product. I've actually seen our revenue increase 10x just by tweaking the UI. Right? And it just didn't happen overnight. It was a series of iterations that happened quickly. We in fact didn't need any approvals to ship to 1% of our customers at Imbue. We shipped routinely 50 times a day. So that's like the whole point. In fact, when I was presenting this at Yahoo, one of the examples I gave was Dropbox. Dropbox's MVP was a video. Literally, they're like signups went up by 75,000 overnight just because they showed people a video of how Dropbox works. Again, the other thing to note here is velocity gives you the option to democratize innovation, right? What it gives you is because innovation is, I think, everyone's job. It's not just you should not have pockets of innovation. The other thing it does is it has the option to create entrepreneurs, as opposed to entrepreneurs within the company. So that's like the high-level goal, my vision, of what I wanted to do at Yahoo. As I started speaking with people, as I started interviewing engineers, I met some interesting folks. One of them was called Ash. He wanted to build something using machine learning for a stocks app on finance. And he said something interesting. He said, I wish there were fewer barriers at Yahoo, right? In terms of barriers, I mean, you don't have to go through this whole list, but sort of it is like there's too much legacy stuff, code base is complex, monolith, new hardware takes too long to arrive, operational burden, ACLs, too many approvals, have to do it in my spare time, and things like that. At some level, I think the job of the leaders, and I think frankly everyone, is to help people like Ash so that they can come to work every day in the morning or whenever and actually want to change the world, right? We need people like that. Every company should have people who actually want to do something which is beyond their just day-to-day. The other part is how can you get more engineers to think like Ash, right? Because how many people have actually built software here? Show by raise of hands. Anything. It could be a script, right? Awesome. If you've ever built something, that's like the greatest joy, right? Of building something, shipping it quickly, iterating on it, showing it to people, getting feedback, and the whole cycle. And the faster the cycle is, the better off you are. I think that's when it struck me that DevOps, I think, is really about eliminating those barriers between idea and execution, right? All kinds of barriers, technical, process, and cultural barriers. So I think that's where our journey had begun at Yahoo. As I interviewed more people, we formed a vision. I was coming from the Lean Startup background. And then that's when we said, let's do something. And then that's when we started campaigning for our vision, and this is what we came up with as to what we think DevOps is, right? Some of you may have seen this, but to us, like DevOps is about a culture of ownership and excellence, engineering, engineer agile and automated processes, culture, process, tools. I mean, any methodology is about those three things, right? and then develop reusable and self-serve tools. I think self-serve part is important because you don't want people, if you want to get something done, you should not go to someone for them to help you out. Everything should be self-serve. To kick ass at delivering products to market fast, prevent defects from reaching customers, and then repair production issues quickly, right? Before we move on, again, just going back, that's like the high-level summary slide. Before we move on, I know I've been talking a lot about velocity and shipping fast. Try not to be foolish about security and privacy because those things are non-negotiable, especially if you have a lot of users, right? So, I mean, you probably heard about all the stuff in news and such lately, especially with Experian and things like that. Anyway, so this was actually in the real world, especially at a company like Yahoo, when you have 1 billion users, you actually get to leverage all the users, you get to leverage all the data. So some of the constraints, some of the barriers are sort of given, just given by the fact that you work at such a large company and you have all these users. In fact, this was a comment made by one of our senior leader, which I fully agree with. So some of the constraints, some of the barriers are given. So again, don't be foolish about security and privacy, even though you're moving fast, right? Okay, enough talk, right? Let's talk something real. So that was the vision, and then we started campaigning for it, and some people said, we are like preaching to the choir, and I was like, at least we are like doing that. But there was enough support as we went around and spoke with people. People believed in our vision, and they wanted to actually help us out and join forces. And then we started executing, but soon hit roadblocks, right? So if you remember the agenda, we'll talk about 4 different initiatives and talk about the challenges faced and some of the lessons that we learned, right? So the vision and then the challenges now. The first, we call it directed alerting, right? How many people know what directed alerting is? Probably the folks at Yahoo, right? It simply means, before that, let me ask you a question, okay? I'll show you something. There'll be 2 options, right? You're supposed to pick one option, right? So option number 1 and option number 2, alerts and then the whole route to the dev teams. Who in this room would like to pick option 1? Okay, a handful, or not, maybe a few more. What about option 2? Wow, a lot more people. How many people are developers here? Okay, so did you guys pick option 2, or was it the opposite? Anyway, so sounds like a lot of people actually like option 2, which was one of our first initiative. We call it directed alerting. Alerts go to teams who can actually fix the problem, right? It's you wrote it, you own it, you wrote it, you run it, and all these different variations. Like every company has it differently, but fundamentally it's about ownership. It's about getting feedback from production quickly to the people who have actually written the software, right? But guess what? Although so many people in this room agree that option number 1 was better, it turns out that it was a hard problem to solve, right? How can you go to a team, like team A, B, C, whatever, like all the teams in between, one of them was my team, and say, we don't need your service? Like, how can you, it's a hard thing to say, right? And also, like, people have this mindset where we sort of blindly believe that if things are done in a certain way, you're supposed to be doing them in the same way, right? So when you hear people say, why do you have all these layers in between? And say, oh, we've been told that that's how things work here. So you should question that shit a lot. Anyway, how do you solve this problem then when it's, you just can't go to someone and say, we don't need you? Any guesses? Or kill everyone, right? And then your problem solved. I was just joking, by the way. But yeah, sort of, you try to give them a different role or try to get them to think differently and then find out different ways in which those teams can actually add value, right? But the reality was it was much harder than that. So we'll go through a series of steps which we took to get to that point where option B was actually possible. By the way, at least in media, option 1 was the business unit I'm part of. Option 1 was what it was before I joined the company. But now most of us have moved on to option 2. First, communicate your vision, right? So page devs directly. Ideally, if you're on call, you should have less than 2 alerts per shift so that you can keep up with root causing each alert, right? If there's more than that, there's no way you can keep up with root causing the alerts. Auto remediation. If a host in a bad state, take it out of auto rotation automatically. So don't wake someone up for that. Although we'll talk about that more. All alerts are actionable. This is important. If there's an alert, you can't just sit on the alert. Ideally, you should be responding to the alert within 15 minutes, and then all alerts should have require human intelligence to fix the problem. If it doesn't require human intelligence, then obviously machines can be able to do that fix for you. And then leverage outages. There's always going to be outages. In my case, when I was, one of the things that drives me nuts is, when things that could have been avoided are just, were not because, some team decided to put themselves, in the chain of alerts. It's also a great way to find your passion. A great way to find your passion is find things that drive you nuts, and then you'll just go do amazing things. Leverage outages, ask some uncomfortable questions, ask thought-provoking questions, but don't be a jerk, right? But make sure you're actually asking those questions. Find your allies, right? In my case, as I was going around the company, talking in postmortems, talking in senior tech council meetings, I met more people. The people believed in my vision. They thought it was the right thing to do. Get buy-in from your teams. Obviously, if one of your teams is in that chain, and if you want to remove your team from that chain, let them know that there's better things to do. You'll get all kinds of responses, like we can't handle the alert volume. Can we still send the low priority alerts to those teams? I mean, those things are not going to work, right? All alerts are actionable. And then, of course, get buy-in from the dev teams, right? You're sending alerts directly to dev where there were like 3 layers in between. You'll get questions like, are you sure you can do this? This is a big change. Like, don't F things up, right? And then I've also heard things like, there will be no one else to blame when things go wrong, right? Because there were like 3 layers in between, right? So if there was an extended outage, it was easy to blame a team. But yeah, pretty bad response. As I talked about, get buy-in from senior leaders. The more, the better. Explain your vision. Be prepared to talk about it very clearly, succinctly, briefly. Leverage important meetings, as I talked about. Be vocal, be communicative. What really helped, launch this model at Yahoo was a high-profile product called Daily Fantasy, which we launched in 2015. New product, new leader, came from a startup, much more open to sort of a Devops model ownership. And I think it's important to show a win, especially at a large company, so that that something as sort of radical as this, again, relatively speaking, is actually possible. So in our case, we showed the company that this is possible. We launched, and it was a success, and things like that. Anyway. And when the time actually came to say no to those teams, it was pretty hard. In fact, things got a bit messy. I'm not sure how many people attended my SRE con talk, but when I was at Zynga, one of the things I did was, I was the head of SRE there, and one of the things I said was because there were too many alerts, I sort of declined SRE support unless teams were certain within alert budgets, right? So if you were spamming alerts, I simply said, go hire your own SRE team. I'm not going to give you SRE support. So I think saying no is important. In fact, you'll see that it's a big theme across this presentation about about the importance of saying no. Anyway, saying no is important. It's hard. We all know it, but it's an important skill. In fact, about this, if you read this HBR article at the bottom, it's probably the most important skill any leader or anyone else, has, right? We don't say no for several different reasons, for social cohesion, for whatever reasons, right? And as mentioned earlier, there's going to be conflict, but if you can stand firm and learn to say no, you can get your initiatives through. And I still remember the meetings where we had to make a go, no-go decision before launching Daily Fantasy in this model. And you'll be surprised as to how much consensus there was, at least amongst my teams. And there was a moment where the leader of the previous team was saying, we shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to be doing. We move too fast. And I was like, everyone just was silent. So I think that was like fascinating. One of the highlights of that initiative. Then we launched. Showed the company that this is actually possible. We wrote a blog post about it. We showcased the win to the whole company. We rolled this out to more teams. And the results sort of look like that, right? If you want to drop like that, that's what you should be doing. You should be picking option number 2. But I don't have to sell this to you because obviously all of you are, I think at least most of you believe in option 2, whether you were like saying the truth or not. Well, that's a different story. But seems like there's consensus here. Okay, that's illustrative purpose. That's not the real graph, but there was a dramatic reduction in the time to detect. In terms of lessons learned for this initiative, there's always going to be stragglers. Again, if you work at a large company, microcultures can exist in a large company, and there's always going to be teams which just don't get it. They just don't get it, and that's okay. We're people, right? People are different. Also, be prepared to piss a lot of people off, because once you try to bring about such a change, some people are not going to be happy. But that's the right thing to do. And if you think that's the right thing to do, I'm not suggesting that that's the right thing, but evaluate if that's the right thing to do, and just you should make it happen. In fact, like some people at Yahoo call me the troublemaker. That's still okay. I still have a job. So. And then in terms of actually reducing the alert noise, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but basic stuff, weekly meetings, we have a daily incident review where we talk about every incident, every alert, or at least we're starting to talk more about alerts. Public shaming, peer pressure is a great way. For example, no one likes too large of numbers or too small of numbers or percentages associated with their name, right? So it's a great way to bring about change, to bring about good behaviors. And then in terms of tools, try to not send alerts as emails so that you can go back and refer. You can go back and refer to them later. Just send them to a log. We live in 2017, and there's enough tools out there at our disposal that stuff like that is pretty easy to do. And then fix alerts closer to the source, and don't add abstractions between your layer, alerts and the devs, because then that causes tight coupling, and then everything becomes a black box, and you just don't know what's happening in that black box. So try to fix alerts closer to the source. Cool. So that was my first initiative. Second one, CD. All right, the same thing here, right? Before we talk about this, let me ask you a question. When you're deploying to production, option number 1, no humans allowed. Option number 2, humans allowed. Which one would you pick? How many would pick option 1? Well, you guys are we are radically aligned. Wow. But how many people are actually using option 1? I know a lot of people raise their hands. It's 10, okay. That's great. How many people are actually using, what about option 2? Cool. Can you talk to me after this meeting? Just joking. Again, there's several different ways to deploy software, so there's no one single way. But at Yahoo, we picked option 2, not me, but there was a pretty big initiative that happened in 2013. I'll talk about that. But just let's spend a few minutes. Most of you know about CD. I come from MU. We've been doing CD since a long time. So at least what I've learned is CD doesn't happen overnight, right? Just like anything else. Enough iterations, enough failures will get you to CD. But again, the heart of CD is the certification plan, right? So and the CD gates. So if you have that solid, then you can get to CD. Again, the other thing that CD gives you is ideally if every commit is going to production, you're shipping in small batches, so that inherently reduces the risk, right? How many commits Is anyone here like send every commit to production? Anyone? Or do you batch commits? Okay, that's fine. I mean, ideally, you should be sending every commit, but that's, again, ideal, aspirational. And you also have high confidence in pushing changes. So I'm not going to sell you guys on CD, but just wanted a quick refresher. So it was a major initiative at Yahoo in 2013, 2014, and it always helps if the CEO of the company believes in an initiative, because once it's top down, sort of, then it becomes easier to bring about a change. It's a great way to get traction. In our case, like Marissa actually wanted to be on CD, but it turns out this was also hard. There's, I don't know, probably 4,000 engineers at Yahoo, and getting everyone to CD is non-trivial, especially if you are, if your team was pushing, using a QA, and then, pushing to production. This can be pretty scary. So the first time I think this was talked about, people got, pretty scared and such. But it's the right thing to do. That's how modern software is built. In fact, I wasn't at Yahoo back then, but I've heard from the Warp Drive team that initially, there were lots of hurdles. There was not even traction, a lot of traction that was made for 1 year. That's when sort of Marissa came back, and we formed the Warp Drive team, if I'm not wrong. And then, there was an initiative, company-wide initiative to actually get the whole company to CD. Anyway, as I talked about, takes time. Takes time for teams to embrace. Takes time for people to actually do TDD. How many people do TDD here? Great. Once you start doing it, you get a hang of it. You just can't. You just keep doing it, right? So, but it takes time. It's just not going to happen overnight. Anyway, just going back, that's when Warp Drive is an initiative. It's an amazing program. It's a bunch of people running company-wide horizontal initiatives, trying to get the company to better standards, better technical capabilities and technical excellence, trying to change the culture and all that good stuff. But one thing I must tell you though, that initiatives like that alone cannot make a culture stick. Like changing a culture is one thing, but making the culture stick is another thing, right? That's that when the culture sticks, when you're like developing software using TDD, right? That's when it has stuck. But again, that's when it really comes down to people, leaders and people, everyone else, to say no to people who are like pushing manually if that's what your company wants to be doing. And then once there is enough support for CD, when the majority of the company is on CD, and if your team is not on CD, then you sort of become like, it becomes hard for you to keep up. Right? So there could be a dependent team which is moving fast, but you can move fast because you require a manual QA approval. So that sort of slows you down, so that creates some pressure, and ultimately, hopefully, every team moves to CD as it happened with Yahoo. But again, there's always going to be stragglers, and that's okay. Persist, change the culture one team at a time. And things and conversations can get ugly, especially if you want everyone to do CD and do the right thing. In terms of results, again, velocity increased dramatically. Developers are obviously more productive. As I talked about, there's the greatest joy is in actually seeing your change in production, as soon as possible, right? It's not like, I commit something and then 3 weeks later it shows up in production. So that the feedback cycle, the feedback loop is important. We have a bunch of production engineers here at Yahoo who showed up, but yeah, I mean, you can ask them. And back in the day, that teams were like spending, babysitting each production pushes. So that doesn't happen. It's all automated. So hundreds of man hours saved. And then, yeah, overall, I mean, it's CD is possible at scale. In fact, you probably heard, Facebook came out with with their blog post that they have migrated over to CD, so which is also awesome. In terms of insights and lessons learned, this is, again, pretty much I covered most of it. There's going to be stragglers. Be prepared to fail multiple times. Every team is not going to embrace CD. Some teams are going to do it for just hitting their goals, but not necessarily embracing the spirit of CD. But if you have enough CD advocates in the company, I think you can also bring about change. And then in terms of test coverage, as we know, there's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be gaps. Which is okay, because I think you need to have enough iterations to get to CD. Okay, awesome. I've covered 2 initiatives, 2 more left. The third one was automation, right? When you say DevOps, obviously, you should absolutely have an automation mindset. If you're doing something more than once, you should stop doing that. You have to, you must automate that part. There's literally zero value in doing something manually more than once, right? Again, same drill here. Let's see, although I sort of gave a hint for you guys on this, but we'll see. Server VM container is in a bad state. Which option would you pick, right? Option number 1 is wake up a human at 3 a.m., have him or her take that resource out of rotation manually. Or option number 2, automatically take it out of rotation, run some diagnostics, and file a ticket, and then someone can take a look at it next morning, right? I see a bunch of people like laughing. Which option? Who would pick option 1? What's that? It's more fun. That's a great. I really appreciate or admire your courage to be the only person who picked option 1. But yeah, we were in the situation, we still are probably in some cases. I'm not, again, as I mentioned, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. If you are in that situation, we all know that it's easier said than done, but do take time to automate, and option 2 is so much more better. And the bonus is that you're immediately mitigating the impact. A human like waking up and running commands doesn't scale too well. But then, if 15% of the hosts are bad, then hopefully you wake up a human, right? So, which means something is going on with your cluster. So that's where initiative 3, automation culture, eliminate the toil. We picked option 2, of course. Again, let the machines do the heavy lifting. They're so good at it. We have better things to do, right? But that's easier said than done, as I talked about. There's always going to be challenges, right? When I joined Yahoo, I heard things like, I've been waking up, at 2 a.m. and I restart the service, and I've been doing this for 2 years. It's like, okay. Anyway, and please don't reward such behaviors. There can be. I've seen a lot of teams, not just at Yahoo, but several different companies, where if you are rewarding the wrong behaviors, people will continue doing or exhibiting those bad behaviors, right? So it's important to, if you're bringing about a change, try to incentivize the good behaviors, right? Because it doesn't make sense if someone's doing the right thing and he's not being rewarded for that, then there's no more incentives to do the right thing, which is automation. And people will question about job security, especially if you are the person, right? I know people who are dev teams say, if this person leaves, we are screwed. We are fuck, whatever, right? And that's when you know that something's not right. How can a team depend on one person or two persons to? So that's when you know this person or persons are doing magic to keep things, which is not bad. But they're being rewarded for that. There's incentives for them to keep doing that. So I think if you notice that, I think you should change, because otherwise you can't scale too well. But again, the promise to my team was, we can actually get to work on higher value add work. And trust me, you can never ever automate yourselves out of your job. And if you do, there's so many problems at scale, and there's so many companies solving some interesting problems that they're going to hire you, right? If some of this is obvious, just pardon me, but some of this is actually not obvious to some of people, which is why I actually wanted to talk about it. Also read this another HBR article about, especially at large organizations, the talent, the misuse of talent is pretty big, especially if you have an awesome product and you can get away with crap. But just because you have an awesome product means, customers are always going to love your product, and it doesn't matter what your operations looks like. But again, fundamentally, without the ability to say no to low-level tasks, you can say yes to things that matter. Right? So if you are doing things that don't matter, please start saying no to things that don't matter, so that you can say yes to things that matter. We build tools. We build a bunch of tools. In fact, when I was talking to folks at Yahoo, there's an auto remediation framework that we built. It's called Halo. It does a bunch of remediations and in production, and it giving us, well, I'll talk about it again, but there's also a failure discovery, disruptive testing framework, metrics-based promotion, load testing framework, and a bunch of other tools. So we invested time, we built the tools, we migrated over some of the workloads to those tools, and the results have been pretty good. Again, as I talked about, hundreds of auto remediations happen per second. In fact, in some cases, some of the bugs in the application, because the remediations were happening so often that we had to monitor the auto remediations, and then some of the bugs surfaced because of that, and we were able to fix those bugs. Of course, like hundreds of man hours saved by reducing the toil. There's no question about that. There's also a dramatic reduction in repeat incidents, and things like that. In terms of insights, I talked about ownership. I talked about handing off things to the development teams. Don't just hand things off to them without setting them up for success, which means build the right tools. I think half of the audience here are ops people, and half of the audience are dev teams. But again, if you are building tools, if you're automation infrastructure teams, make sure you're setting up the dev teams up for success. Also continue to provide support in terms of expert services, consulting, and whatnot. And then the last initiative was, or at least the one I'm going to talk about is AWS. I was also pretty passionate about this. And there you go, another question. Which one would you pick? Build. Option number 1 is build. Option number 2 is buy. Option number 3 is build and buy, or in a hybrid. Who would pick option number 2? Just, again, say, I don't know, for what it's worth. Cool, okay, 3 people. Option number 1. Right, I am. I'm just an exercise. I mean, I'm not getting into it deep. Just if you were to, just for fun, that's all. But there were 2 people and 3 people who picked option 1 and 2. What about option 3? Okay, cool. So I think in this case, I shouldn't have given option number 3. If I did not give you option number 3, which one would you have picked? 1? How many would have picked option 1 if there was no option 3? Interesting. And what about option 2? Half and half. Okay, it's a pretty divided group. Cool. Well, again, obviously there's no right or wrong answer, as with so many other things in life. Do what's right for your business. But in our case, I think option number 3 seemed to make sense. But if you think about it, for a company like Yahoo to be making a strategic bet on AWS is sort of a big deal, right? For a 21-year-old company, six or multiple data centers around the world, hundreds of millions of dollars invested in them, 500,000 servers, and at that massive scale. But we did pick option 3. In fact, just to add here, when I was at Zynga, has anyone worked at Zynga here in the past? No one, okay, or one. All new games, back in the day when Farmville was big, all new games were launched on AWS. And once the traffic patterns were predictable, they were brought back in-house to something called a zCloud, which was private cloud. Brilliant, right? I mean, I don't think there was a way we could have scaled Farmville to 75 million users in 5 weeks or something, which was pretty crazy. Anyway, why AWS? Again, most of this is or AWS or Microsoft Azure. I'm not Amazon didn't pay me for this, but just letting you know. Talking about a public cloud in general, AWS seems to be pretty mature here, but this applies to any public cloud out there. It's billable, scalable. You remember if you talked about the constraints, I said hardware takes long to arrive. If hardware takes 6 weeks to arrive, there's all the incentives to hold on to hardware, right? Why would I give up my hardware if new hardware takes 6 weeks to arrive? Doesn't make sense. So this whole thing about you're actually being billed for your usage. It's scalable. Theoretically, it's infinitely scalable. I talked about Farmville. It's on demand, which means I can just spin things up. I can tear things down. It's self-serve. Self-serve is important. Self-serve is sort of close to the no ops. When we say no ops, it doesn't mean no operations. It means that you don't have to go and tap someone on the shoulder to push to your website, right? That's what no ops really means. Again, you get with it, things like a public cloud, you get infrastructure, tooling, security, things like that for free. You don't have to deal with that. So you have to really ask yourself, are you a technology company? Are you a some other company, a product company, and then make a decision. So seems like a hybrid cloud seems like a pretty safe bet, but you still need to make that bet. It also depends on the use cases. In our case, we have a fail-safe and a fallback stack in AWS, which means if all of Yahoo's data centers are down, we can still serve some content from AWS. We also have a load testing framework. If you think about it, it's easy to spin up instances. We also have a lot of non-prod test frameworks, rapid experimentation, and things like that. Of course, like launching new products. What I mean by that is products which don't have any dependencies with the existing stacks. So we can easily, do things like auto scaling. But again, challenges, obviously, it's awesome. So if you're working at a large company, trying to make this strategic bet, think about the security, think about the building, think about some of the foundational work that has to be done before it's widely deployed across the company. Of course, networking and the most common thing I hear is, my service depends on a different service, but that service is not on AWS. Obviously, the cross-colo latency and things like that come into picture. And of course, like forklift, when you are deploying, when your applications are not cloud native or not built with cloud in mind, and if they're not like cloud native, then you may not be able to take advantage of the cloud, right? And some of the compute resources it provides. Of course, forklift versus cloud native, which we talked about. In terms of results, I think we have like 4 minutes left. Again, load testing framework. We built something that's scaled. I think what's most important here is, when we deployed this and when we made a big deal of AWS and when we made a lot of noise, there were people who were like, in fact, senior leaders of the company who were asking me, are we allowed to use AWS? I was like, no, that's okay. We are absolutely allowed to use AWS. In fact, in my next slide, this is if I were to like give you one thing from this talk, again, I talked about saying no, this is the other thing, right? Is just question assumptions and don't, just because things are done in a certain way doesn't mean that they have to be done in that certain way. So break the rules, but just make sure that you're breaking them in broad daylight, right? This is actually someone, it's in quotes because a senior leader at Yahoo mentioned this to me when we were doing this. Because some people, if you do things and if you're not aligned with the rest of the company, you're not going to go too far. And then of course, it's better to beg for forgiveness and then ask for permission. But yeah, just going back again, the results. We talked about the fail-safe, all new products, rapid experimentation. What I was really trying to get to was the excitement that developers have when you introduce them to something like AWS that's priceless. I've actually seen the engagement levels go up so high that the engineering managers on the team came up to me and said, "Wow, this has been amazing. Like we quite literally built a backend over the weekend, and then we didn't like it, and then so we built something else. I think it was based on Kafka or something else." But yeah, so that it also gives you something like a self-serve tool like AWS gives you that option as opposed to asking for hardware. In terms of insights and lessons learned, get the consolidated billing early on so that you're making it easy for teams to use it. There were times where people were spending, opening up their wallets and spending $10,000 and getting that reimbursed. So if you make it easy for people to use AWS, they're going to use it. Again, making strategic bets is hard, but if you truly believe in your vision, if you think this is the right move for the company, then you should make that bet, at least see where it goes, and then iterate based on the feedback. Okay, that almost comes to the summary section. I think I talked about most of this, so I'm not going to repeat it again. Learn to say no more. I know I'm repeating that again, but there's a tremendous value in that. Write down your thoughts on paper or on like a blog post. You can reach a lot of people if you write your thoughts down. Like I'm giving a talk, but I can only reach you people. But if I write things down, and if there's a collaboration tool, it's a great way to communicate your vision, right? So get into the habit of also writing. It calms me down, so I love to write, although I don't write as much. And then You'll be surprised as to, when you said DevOps, again, the reason DevOps is in quotes is because no one knows what that is. To us, I just told you what DevOps means to us. And by the way, DevOps is not just, engineering doing things on their own, right? At least to us, it's about, shipping markets, delivering products to market fast and preventing issues, preventing defects from reaching customers. And then if defects do reach customers, you're repairing them quickly. So to us, those are the functional pillars of DevOps. The other thing is reliability is overrated. In fact, I have an iPhone, and like even my iPhone is not 100% reliable, right? So if I'm using a service on my iPhone, let's say the Apple Stocks app, or Yahoo, which is powered by Yahoo Finance, Yahoo Finance doesn't have to be, I'm just taking an example, have a 5 nines availability. That shit's overrated, right? So like your laptop, your Wi-Fi at home, like nothing's, like it's not even close to being like 5 nines. So move fast, because that's been the talk of the team, is, velocity is important. That's what sort of differentiates you from your competitors. It becomes a strategic advantage. Again, I don't have to sell you on velocity, but that's how you stay relevant in this market, is to move fast and ship fast, fail fast, learn fast. And again, don't aim for 100%. You can never meet 100% of your goals. There's always going to be stragglers. Pick your battles. You cannot win them all, and that's okay, right? One last thing was, in terms of, again, dev and ops, we talked a lot about ownership, and, if you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing, then ask yourself, is that the right thing to be doing? In my opinion, this is the right model. Like the core dev teams own everything, right? Deploy, test, monitor, on-call performance, and debugging, incident capacity. Non-core dev teams, own infrastructure, automation, tooling, network, developer productivity. I think, in fact, like developer productivity is often, in my opinion, an under-invested area, right? I think so. It's a great way to, I think it's great to invest in those areas. Continue to provide expert services, but again, ownership is key. Like whatever you own, you should be, owning it truly, right? And then I've posted a couple of links here. There's awesome people who write. You should follow them on Twitter. One of them is someone called JBD. Just so you know, SRE support is optional, Google. You have to earn it. Reflect, soul search, ask some tough questions. One of my favorite questions is like, why does my team exist? Like, how are we, providing value? Do the right thing. We already talked about this. And then I think, it really comes down to, are you ready to say no to things that don't matter so that you can say yes to things that matter? That's it. I would appreciate feedback on this talk. Thank you. I can take a couple questions if there's if there's time, or if people have questions. Ideally, they're not supposed to have questions because we're radically aligned, right? There were some, anomalies here and there, but ideally, all of us are just perfect world, right? All of us are like, you guys didn't even need this talk in the first place.
Yeah, hi Kishore, Rajan here.
Yeah.
So I would like to understand the DevOps visibility in the database and data warehousing environment as well as the data science environment. Normally what I see is whatever DevOps implementation is there, it is a more kind of application stack, right? But what are the scope to implement the automation? I'm not saying it is a DevOps, but I'm saying that how we can automate, like you can say it is a DBOps or DWOps or data ops, but what are the tools and what are the feasibility and you can see in that area?
Well, I'm not a database expert, but again, the core principles stay the same, right? The core principles are about ownership. So if you're a database team, I would, if I were running a database team, for example, I would make, for example, everything should be self-serve, everything should be, automated, everything should be agile, right? We don't want people to, let's say let's take a good example. Let's say there's, Kubernetes and Docker containers. Everything is ephemeral, right? So containers can spin up anytime. And if new IPs are, come into the equation, if new IPs are assigned and if they have to talk to the database, and if I have to go to your team or to my team to get permissions to access the database, that's the wrong one. That should be as a service, right? Just like networking as a service. So maybe database as a service would be a logical thing to be doing, in my opinion. But again, it's about ownership, right? It's about automation. It's about doing things quickly. But I don't have an answer on what specific tool sets, right? But you can do CD. I mean, there's Liquibase or whatever. There's apparently you can do, you can do CD with databases these days because there's, you can deploy schemas, continuously. Yeah. Any other question? Yeah, I think someone had a question.
Ritesh.
Well, everything is aspirational, right? Hey, there's nothing wrong in being aspirational. Of course, I mean, how long? I mean, we've been doing this for 3 years. At least I've been at Yahoo for 3 years. Again, as I mentioned, it's a process, it's a journey. It depends on how fast we've done CD, we've built a bunch of tools. We made a strategic bet on AWS, and you may see more of that in the future. We just built a Kubernetes cluster, which is supporting 100,000 RPS, supporting, powering Yahoo Finance, Yahoo Sports, and Yahoo News. And we did that in 9 months. So, and we continue to make progress, right? I mean, and it's a continuous, improvement. So I don't think you will ever be done. So, yeah. But yeah, if the talk was a bit aspirational, yes. I mean, the real life is not going to be. The point is for you guys to get thinking about what are some of the things you can go back, what are some of the key takeaways, and then, again, obviously the reality is going to be different, right? But keep doing the right thing. Any other questions? Yeah. I think he probably needs the mic.
Hello. So are you suggesting SRE when you say no ops basically? So you say that alerts need to be directly routed to developers, right? So we definitely need to have some ops guys as well. So are you suggesting that we need to have a SRE who kind of partially works on development activities and also looks at ops activities as well?
Well, I mean, if you go back to the model that I, suggested, right? This is the model, right? So core teams, ideally all the alerts should go, at least the alerts related, which have to do anything with the code, have to go to the dev teams who have written the code, right? The core business logic. You can also have dev teams who are doing infrastructure, right? So anything that has to do with infrastructure, the alerts have to be routed to those infrastructure teams. Alerts to do with network have to go to the network team, right? Alerts to do with databases have to go to the database team. It's really about, but the problem I have with, or one of the SRE and patterns is, if you remember the first slide, like why are there like 4 layers, right, between alerts and dev? That seems like excessive. And when you get alerted for something which you have no clue about, what are you going to do? And if the response is I will execute a playbook, like that, if you can fix something by executing a playbook, like why not automate that, right? Again, some of this is, very ideal. I think the reality may be different, but we should all aspire to move towards that model. And SRE support should be optional, in my opinion. It should be earned. You should keep your shit clean, otherwise, you're not going to get SRE support. Sorry for my French, but yeah. Any other questions? I told you. We're all aligned.
So in any case, if you have any more questions, you can anyways catch up with them during the break.
You can always ping me after. But I would love feedback on this talk so that, for any future talks, I'll even pay you for it. I'm just joking. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kishore.